Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 31. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
I'm Darcy, and I would probably call myself a historian, even if I don't do it by trade anymore. I did my undergrad and my postgrad at Regent's Park College in Oxford, and I went totally expecting to be a modern historian, fell in love with the medieval, and found the Anglo-Saxons, and kind of it went from there.
It makes you the expert for this particular podcast series, and welcome to the podcast series. What is the object that we're concentrating on right now?
So today we're talking about what I kind of affectionately refer to as the Wakerley Brooch, even though there's plenty of brooches found at Wakerley, so there's more than one. But for the context of this, the Wakerley Brooch, it is a square-headed Anglo-Saxon brooch made of copper alloy, and it would have been worn by women on their clothing, kind of more decorative than functional. It has some very lovely decoration on the front. There are some animals, there are some S-shaped motifs, and what's super interesting though is that there is some writing on the back.
Wakerley is a village to the north of Northamptonshire. An archaeological dig threw up this particular brooch, but a lot of other things besides. So was Wakerley a major community back in the day?
Yeah, so the way we know the most about Anglo-Saxon communities at the time is a lot of it comes from cemeteries and kind of what we find there and kind of how they're laid out. And Wakerley seems to have been quite active in the early Anglo-Saxon period. So, for example, this brooch was found in a grave that dates from like the last quarter of the 6th century, so between like 575 and 600. So there was like lots of very normal families living there. There wasn't a huge amount of super high status materials. So just, yeah, kind of like the everyday person.
So this item is 1400 years old at least.
Yeah, pretty old.
What about the craftsmanship of the brooch itself? Was this a one-off item that would have been commissioned, or was this an item of mass production?
Not mass production in how we think about it these days, but there were a lot of kind of similar brooches. So, for example, there's one in Cambridge that is kind of very similar. It's got similar motifs, a very like similar decorative style, but no two would have been exactly the same. But this was a very unique kind of brooch. So it kind of would have been incised, kind of like the decoration is kind of like carved in. By no means am I saying necessarily that the person who owned it said, I want this and this. The craftsman would have had kind of more artistic license and choice to put on it what he thought or she thought.
Would money have changed hands, or would this have been a bartering situation? Do you know?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting about this brooch in particular because it was about 50 years old when it was buried. And at the time, people probably weren't living for that long. Life expectancy was much shorter. So it seems likely that this might have belonged to more than one woman. So, I mean, at some point it may have been purchased. It may have been a gift. A lot of a gift-giving culture at the time. That's kind of how ties were consolidated, marriages, kind of social contracts. So somebody may well have purchased it at some point, or it may have been a kind of a swap in materials. So somebody may have provided the craftsman with the copper alloy and said, I want a brooch, and they did it that way. And then it seems to have kind of passed hands at least through maybe 2 generations.
And the copper alloy, would that too have been created on site, or would it have been an item of raw material that the craftsman would have purchased from the creator of the metal in the first place?
I'm not entirely sure whether it was kind of melted down from something else and then used, because there was a lot of recycling of metals going on at this time as well. But it's likely that the craftsman may have acquired that, or the person who kind of wanted the brooch acquired it and took it to the craftsman. So it wouldn't have been made then.
What would the brooch have said about the person wearing it?
This is one of my favourite things about kind of doing like an archaeological Anglo-Saxon history is that it is incredibly personal. So these items that belonged to real people just like you and I think it says a lot about identity, particularly with one that might have been a kind of passed down through generations. That's kind of enforcing that connection with the family or with the local community. It plays a lot of role in like status as well. So the Wakerley brooch isn't made of gold with garnet decorations as kind of like higher status ones would have been, but it also is quite finely decorated. And again, it has kind of the writing on the back, which is what makes it quite unique. So I think that they're incredibly personal items, and that's one of the reasons why they are buried.
Yes, let's talk about the brooch and its uniqueness, because actually the uniqueness is not to do with the decoration. It's what's on the back. So What is on the back and why does it make the brooch unique?
Yeah, this is the truly exciting part about the brooch, I think. On the back, we've got 5 runic letters, which is like a pre-Christian alphabet. So it's written in Old English, we think, but it's using a different alphabet, basically. And it has 5 letters, which are a B, a U, a H, a U, and I, which pronounced, hopefully I'm getting it right, Behui, which look like personal name elements that are found in Anglo-Saxon England and also in Germanic contexts. So some brooches do have the names of the craftsmen inscribed on them, but what's particularly unique about this is that the name is on the back. It's actually really difficult to see the runes. The first time I came to see the brooch, it took me like a good 5 minutes to actually figure out where they were. They're so faintly kind of incised on the back. And so that kind of led me to wonder about whether this isn't the name of a craftsman, which on other objects is kind of like displayed on the front, like much more boldly, like kind of saying, look, I made this, like I'm the crafter. I think this may be a female personal name, and it might not necessarily be the woman that it was buried with. As we said, the brooch was 50 years old. So again, it's because it was on the reverse, it was kind of worn against the chest, so nobody would have seen that, but the wearer would have known that it was there. So I think that there's an element of personalisation. Like, that's not a public message, but it's unique from any other brooch that doesn't have that. And I think it's really interesting because at the time, you know, the early Anglo-Saxon period is often considered like the Dark Ages, when there's like a lack of literacy, and there are no like kind of written records surviving from this early period. But I think that it's kind of an example of where writing was being used in a way that we might not today say, oh, this was a literate society. But even if somebody could look at that and see the shapes of those runes and recognise that as that's this person, or that is this name, or that means this thing, that's a different way of using writing. There is kind of this tradition associating writing with people in early Anglo-Saxon England, and we see it in kind of patches and fragments. We don't have surviving texts, we don't have kind of big written pieces, but we do have these little bits of writing. And in particular, this example in Wakerley is quite unique because more of the early writing is found in East Anglia. And so I think that the Wakerley brooch may be part of a much bigger picture that doesn't survive today. Or it may be an instance of somebody who's quite unique, who actually did have a relationship with writing. And yeah, I think that's quite cool.
Today, we take decoration of our clothes for granted. We take decoration of ourselves through tattoos and markings and piercings for granted. Was a love of fashion, an awareness of the aesthetic, was that commonplace?
Yes, definitely. Kind of cultural expressions and kind of expressions of identity was through kind of clothing in that way. These brooches would have been commonplace. That also did say something, particularly kind of in the very early Anglo-Saxon period when art and like decoration styles were rapidly changing. Like, it does say something, and it's got quite like a Germanic kind of background, or like it's within that tradition. So it is kind of stating that. It's definitely not Brittonic or Celtic.
But it's definitely a statement of self.
Yeah.
What is your reaction to this brooch, both as a historian and, if I may say so, as a woman?
That's a really great question, and to tell a tidbit about it is, I remember the first time that I went to see the brooch, I was expecting to just see it on its own, and actually the archivist brought out some of the other objects that were found in the same grave, and in amongst them were a couple of finger rings, and I wear rings every single day, and there was something about seeing those that really brought home for me, in the same way that we don't wear brooches in the same way these days, but rings, yes, we do. And it was one of those moments when I was like, wow, these are real people, just like you and I, expressing themselves in the same way. Like, I don't necessarily put a ring on and think, oh, I'm symbolising that I'm from the UK, or I'm symbolising that I'm Germanic, or I'm symbolising that I'm Christian. But it feels like part of my identity as a person, regardless of kind of what it represents more broadly. And I think that, kind of seeing those things together and getting this picture of who this woman was.
So an echo of well over 1,000 years ago from one citizen of Northamptonshire to another. What do you think this brooch says about Northamptonshire, perhaps through the village of Wakerley? I guess there's 2 things I could bring out of that in particular. And I think the first is just how similar we were in our day-to-day lives. We all had the same feelings, the same thoughts. We have friends, we have families, we express ourselves in what we wear. And it's that kind of the connection of, we're all people. We're all the same no matter how much the world changes. And history is rather closer to us than perhaps we give it credit for. Definitely. Darcy, it's been fascinating to talk to you. Thank you for bringing the brooch back to life through the perspective of somebody appreciating the aesthetic encapsulated in this particular brooch. Thanks for bringing it to the exhibition as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.